Hey guys, Yibs here coming to the video, and this one is going to be a Mythic Plus talent guide regardless of the week's affixes. So whether it be bolstering, fortified, explosive, teaming, whatever it is, these talents are going to show you what you should be running in each dungeon. Now this is going to be made in mind of running higher level keys, so 15 and higher. On lower level keys you can copy this and have the same success. However, you are much more liberal to run whatever you want in lower keys, as trash tends to die a lot more quickly, same with the bosses. So whatever talents you run in a lower key won't make too much of a difference, but on higher keys you should definitely try to follow this guide in terms of what talents you're running and based off of your group composition. So what I've done is I've made a Google document here. You guys can see in just a second. Here I have a Google Doc, and all it has is Fortified, and then it has all of the dungeons listed, and then Tyrannical and all of the dungeons listed, and then it just has the talents that you should be playing in each dungeon. There are some additional notes below, although not be too many, just for some minor talent swaps based off the dungeon depending on your group. I'll cover that in this video, as well as some other options and talk a little bit more in depth of why we're running specific talents. And then below there's also the utility talent, so I just talk about defensive cooldowns down here, also whether you should be running Howl of Terror or Demonic Circle in the dungeon. So first, we'll go on to Fortified, so we have all the dungeons here. Now, on Fortified difficulty, you'll pretty much always be running Writhe and Agony. The only dungeon where I don't necessarily recommend doing this is Court of Stars. However, I do always run Writhe and Agony in Court of Stars. A lot of Warlocks will prefer Malefic Grasp in Court due to the mini-bosses and the patrol ads before the second boss. You do gain quite a bit of DPS from Malefic Grasp in that scenario. However, in Court of Stars, you'll generally have a higher overall DPS running Writhe in Agony. The only dungeon where I truly recommend you run single target talents is Eye of Ashara. Eye of Ashara is a dungeon where the AoE packs, often the crabs and the globs, you can deal with without AoE talents. They're just small packs. You have a lot of damage with Soul Flame. You don't need to burst it down with Seed of Corruption. And any sort of time that you're pulling a Hydra, you can often do that with crab packs, and you can focus on single targeting down the Hydra because that will be the last target alive. And aside from that, the rest of the dungeon is all single target pulls or bosses, which is why you'll be running Writhe and Agony, Contagion, and Soul Harvest. You do take Death's Embrace in this dungeon due to the effect that it has on the last boss. However, you can run Soul Conduit here and equip the Legendary Ring on the last boss if you prefer to play a higher shard type of game. Now, in all of the other dungeons, you're going to be running ELT and Sow the Seeds, except for Seat, where you do run Absolute Corruption, just because it is so strong on a lot of the bosses, as well as the fact that you don't lose too much trash DPS in running Absolute Corruption. But the one dungeon that we do have in question here is Neltharion's Lair, and of course in Upper Kara you run single target. So Neltharion's Lair, you can run single target on a Fortified Neltharion's Lair. If you are pugging, I do recommend that you run single target talents on a Neltharion's Lair. However, if you're in a group that is very competent and you're running like a plus 20 Nell's Lair and you're doing massive kite pulls, I do recommend you take ELT and Sow the Seeds over single target talents. You can still run the single target talent build, but you will find if you're doing mass pulls on Fortified Week in Neltharion's Lair, you will find benefit from ELT and Sow the Seeds. And I just sort of talk about that down here for Neltharion's Lair. If you're doing larger pulls on plus 20, it can be worth running AoE talents. So if you want to read about that there, you can. And then just some additional notes on explosive weeks. It may be worth taking Death's Embrace over Soul Conduit. This is just because when you're killing orbs as a Warlock, you tend to generate a lot of shards, and when running Soul Conduit, this can be a good thing because the more shards you have, the more % chance you have to have that shards refunded. So that's just really good, right? But if you find you're overcapping, Death's Embrace can be a great choice, especially on trash, just because since you have infinite shards, you're just going to have an additional execute bonus once the mobs get low on health. So on tyrannical keys, the talents do change a little bit depending on the dungeon. There are a few dungeons where you will be changing to single target, but still for the most part it stays the same. On tyrannical weeks, trash is just as important. It has less HP, so it dies faster, but killing it more quickly means you have more time for the boss as well. So often on tyrannical difficulties, I highly recommend you stick to the same talent base as you do on Fortified. There are some dungeons where this changes a little bit, those dungeons being Vault of the Wardens and Halls of Valor, just because those are extremely boss heavy dungeons. So depending on your group in Halls of Valor and in Vault, you might want to pick up single target talents, those being Contagion, Soul Harvest, and Soul Conduit in these dungeons. I do not recommend running Death's Embrace in Vault or Halls of Valor. Halls of Valor being because you lose Death's Embrace value on the first boss and the last boss because just they don't go into execute. And then in Vault of the Wardens, just because there's so many additional adds on these bosses that you're just able to generate so many shards that you'll be able to get a lot of bonus damage from Unstable Affliction. But in every other dungeon, again, I recommend running that ELT, Sow the Seeds for additional trash DPS, just because of how many mobs you'll be pulling in these dungeons and how efficient it will be. Now, some warlocks, I often put down here as well, talent choice will largely depend on your group composition, and that should influence your choice. This is what I recommend. Often, if you're running with a group and I need single target for this dungeon because my group doesn't have it and we need to kill these bosses and that's what's holding us back, then run single target. Don't take this as the be-all, end-all. But this is what I recommend in, a regular group composition. These are the sort of talents that you should be running on tyrannical difficulty. Now, in terms of utility, the only thing that varies is running either Howl of Terror or Demonic Circle. Now, the reason you're going to be running Demonic Circle in a lot of dungeons is because you're going to be able to cheese certain mechanics. Like in Halls of Valor, for example, you can port out of the Storm so you don't proc Art Lightning onto your friends on Herja. You can also dodge the Fell Rush on Skovald. Maw of Souls, you can port back and forth on Helya, as well as use it as a way to dodge the scythes on the second boss, as well as the first pack. Whenever you get gripped in, you can Demonic Circle back. So Demonic Circle just has a ton of utility, and quite honestly, you can run it in any dungeon. Running Howl of Terror in Seat, Cathedral, Nels, and Eye of Ashara is not at all necessary. It's just kind of a flavor thing that if you want it, you can use it to proc Safuz more efficiently, as well as use it as a mass interrupt. However, Demonic Circle is a viable option for all of these dungeons as well. You can find use of it. Over here, Dark Pact is just the standard for every dungeon. It's just another defensive cooldown. It's like 3 million bonus HP or something like that whenever you pop it on a minute cooldown. However, on lower level keys, if you just want to go faster, Burning Rush won't hurt you at all. So these are the talents you're going to be running in each dungeon, regardless of the affixes on the week on the difficulty level. Of course, they are subject to your own personal preferences, though, right? This is just what I recommend you run regardless of the dungeon. Now, just one final note before I finish up here. In Eye of Ashara, you can run AoE talents. I have strictly listed in my guide that you run single target. However, if you are on a teaming fortified week and your group has massive lower body parts, then you can run AoE talents if you're pulling super big and it's necessary. Although I highly recommend that you don't, I do recommend that you pick up single target talents. Okay? Alright, perfect. So that was the Mythic Plus Dungeon Guide. Take a look at the Google Doc. Just kind of pick and choose your talents based off of that. Hopefully it helps you learn a little bit and maybe just, will up your damage the next time you run Mythic Plus. Some final ending notes before I end this video. I am writing currently a Warlock guide. It's going to be a guide I make available to the public. I'm going to show you guys it really quickly. It's not anywhere means close to being done yet, but I hope to have it done over the next week and a half. I'm also going to be doing this for Battle for Azeroth when it comes out. I'll write a full Warlock guide before the expansion is released, and then also I will keep it up to date as patches release in the expansion. So here you can see I just have the document here. It just has a brief overview, and then I have a few select sort of things in here that I'll be talking about throughout it. I might update this more in the future and just have more sort of points where I go over, like I might make a Mythic Plus section, different things like that. But you can see here I just, I've started writing, and I'm going to be adding visuals as well as, certain effects just to make it look a lot prettier. But right now this is kind of the base that I have for it. So I'm going to be making this available to everybody. And then what I plan on doing aside from this is I'm going to be starting eventually a Patreon where I'm going to do written guides regarding bosses and Mythic Plus dungeons that I make available to patrons, as well as subs on my Twitch chat. But I'll still be releasing video guides regarding most everything, so don't feel like you need to do that. It's just going to be kind of something extra for people who feel like they want to support me, and they get a little bit of something out of it if they like written guides. Also, in terms of coaching, I'm going to be opening up options to that next week. So if you want coaching, I'm going to be making a video just regarding how you're going to be getting into that. And it's going to involve my Discord, and you can message me and we'll talk about that, okay? So if you stuck to the end of this video, now you have a little bit more information about what's going on. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you guys later. Also, the description for the Google Doc will be in below, okay? So keep a lookout for that. Thanks for watching. See you guys later. Have a good one.